but I would separate my mission from my business. And, you work 5 days a week, you go to church, you think missional. And I've come to realize that my business is my mission, and that in God's economy, that's the only thing that makes sense. Why, if it wasn't that way, then I'd be off mission 5 days a week.
Yeah.
And so if Fort Capital, if HLC and the bank and the logistics company are my mission, then every day I get to be on mission.
Yeah.
Which means I've got to do some things differently, which starts with loving your people, getting to know your people, know them to the point where you can minister to them, where you can serve them, and not keep them arm's length. So I missed out on a lot of hundreds, maybe thousands of opportunities to do that until I figured that out.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Fort Podcast. My name is Chris Powers, and I want to thank you for joining me today. This show is an open-ended discussion and journey covering real estate, business, entrepreneurship, and investing. I would love to hear from you by tweeting me at Fort Worth Chris on Twitter. And if you've enjoyed this show, I would be super grateful if you would follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever platform you listen to. And if on Apple, it would mean a lot if you'd leave a rating and review. Last but not least, you can find all these episodes on YouTube. Thank you so much again for joining me, and enjoy the show. And this episode is brought to you by Fort Capital. At their core, Fort Capital is a privately owned real estate investment firm, but beyond that, they are committed to technology and a world-class culture, which leads to a very forward-thinking mentality. Do you want to stay in the know on all things Fort Capital? Be sure to follow Fort Capital on LinkedIn and sign up for the quarterly newsletter on www.fortcapitallp.com. Fort Capital's quarterly newsletter subscribers are the first to receive business and real estate insights, news, videos, podcasts, free resources, and more. For anyone that tried buying a car over the last couple of years, it was not an easy thing to do. I just got a car and had one of the best experiences I've ever had with Frank Kent Cadillac here in Fort Worth, Texas. When you think of Fort Worth businesses, it's hard to not think of Frank Kent Cadillac. Well, that's because they've been around for 87 years. And with history like that, they know a thing or two about how to treat their clients. Like no dealer markups over MSRP. The price on the sticker is the price you pay. So when you're in the market for a new vehicle, check them out. New inventory is arriving daily, from the XT4, 5 and 6 to the CT4 and 5 Blackwings with CPO rates. There is always something in store at fkcadillac.com. That's fkcadillac.com. Frank Kent Cadillac, community driven, locally different since 1935.
Can you give like your 2-minute who you are and what brought you to today?
Well, I'll start early in that I was blessed to be raised by great parents in West Texas. And so much of who I am is a result of that. And went to Abilene Christian University, got an accounting major, moved to Dallas because I had this misguided notion I wanted to be wealthy. And I also had a path to it through real estate. That I developed these ideas in college about how I could do that, and real estate was the vehicle. And so I was married my junior year in college.
Wow.
My wife and I came to Dallas with no contacts or influence of any type, and got started in the business.
And how'd you get started in the business?
Well, one of the key elements to my dream page and professional dream page was I needed to own buildings.
Yep. And
so I looked for the best company in the world to own buildings, and that was Trammel Crowe Company.
Yep.
At the time. So I would work for free, but I was fortunate to do a deal with a Crowe partner, and he liked me and hired me, because they wouldn't hire you unless you had a Harvard MBA.
Yeah.
And I didn't have that. But I did impress this partner who hired me, and then I was exactly where I wanted to be.
Right.
And my goal from the very beginning was to learn how to own buildings. And I went to school on them and learned that trade. And after 6 years, I'll never forget the the afternoon, my senior partner came in, and because the economy blew up,
Right.
and said, Holt, if you think you're ever going to own a building with Crowe, you're crazy. Those days are over. And that's when I started charting my exit, because my dream page was to own buildings. So at 29 years old with 3 boys under the age of 5, I left.
Wow.
And started our business.
Why do you think it is that so many of the great real estate companies, especially here in Texas, are all part of that Trammel Crowe class of kind of your generation?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it was an incredible culture and environment. Mr. Crowe basically gave you his balance sheet.
Yep.
And there was a period of time for about 5 years where he spent a lot of time at Harvard Business School. And he hired some people that believed in smarter is better.
Right.
And so they would recruit from Harvard and Stanford. For instance, my freshman class had 51 Harvard MBAs.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine that?
Yeah. Wow.
Going and hiring 51 Harvard MBAs. So you bring them all to Dallas. You have this incredible bandwidth and aggressive talent. And you give them a blank check and say, go to these 96 cities.
Yep.
And you had to start leasing. We all started making $18,000 a year in leasing space. And after about 18 months, you'd kind of self-select. I mean, either you made it or you didn't.
Yep.
And if you're good at what you did, well, then they would start working you towards this partner path. And it was a marvelous environment. It created all these, this collegial feel amongst like-minded, like-aged young men and women. And then, of course, the world blew up. And so you could look back and say,
and what year is this?
This would have been, things blew up in 86.
Okay.
And, it was unlike any blow up that someone your age, Chris, would even, I was young at the time. So you can't even imagine how bad it was. We built more office buildings in Dallas from 81 to 85 than has been built since.
Oh my gosh.
Can you imagine that?
Yeah.
And so that's how out of control it was. And the S&Ls blew up. The Tax Act of 86 is what caused a lot of it. It blew up syndicates. And so it was just a terrible time. So basically, if you looked at the model, although it was a wonderful place to be, if you looked at the business model,
right,
it didn't work because it disbanded.
Yep.
And so there are other models like the Heinz Company and others that made it through all those cycles that likely had a better model. But I don't think there's anybody that had a better aggregation of talent model than the Trammel Crowe Company.
That's fascinating. So probably because when opportunity arose in 86, you had a lot of guys that believed in themselves, Harvard MBAs that said, I can go take on the world.
Exactly. And those same people today, I'm fortunate to speak up there, and it's hard to get them interested in real estate.
Yep.
Because they want to get in private equity, and they tend to chase wherever the money is. And
right.
Another thing that it's interesting how there's some anecdotal consequential things happen that can create a story. But there was a book called The 100 Best Companies to Work For in America.
Right.
And the Trammel Crowe Company was number 1. So in the book, it was well read, and it talked about secretaries that were millionaires.
Yep.
So, you send that and put that in front of a bunch of MBAs, and they're like, let's all go there.
Let's go. Let's eat. So 86, you have 3 boys and you decide to leave. Walk us through that journey a little bit.
Actually, I started in 86. I left in 93. So it was, basically I started charting my exit. And I got the conversation I gave you about my senior partner happened in 1990. I'll digress just a bit, but from that point, I started trying to replace my income. And so I started buying oil and gas leases just west of Fort Worth here in Young County. And I'd go out on the weekends and work these stripper wells and try to make a 2-barrel well, a 5-barrel well. And basically by doing that, I replaced my income.
Right.
And come home on Monday, clean my fingernails, and lease industrial space. So my wife and I, she'd do the books, and we built this little oil business, and that helped give me courage to make the decision to leave. And I got lucky too, because I bought $16 oil on a 3-year payout, and President Bush invaded Iraq, and oil went to $60. So
Yeah.
I got to pay my debt off in about 12 months. And so things worked there. And that's probably one of the few things, Chris, that I can look back and I've tried to wonder, why was I in the oil business?
Because you didn't stay in it.
I didn't stay in it. And that's that's been a head scratcher for years.
Yeah.
I think providentially it may have been just to give me the courage to leave.
Did somebody give you that idea, or how did you know to go buy stripper wells?
One, I was from that area too. I worked on rigs in the summer. So I was familiar with it.
Yeah.
And so I just grabbed it. And I had a lender that would loan me the money on oil and gas leases. And so I did it. But it never really transitioned to anything else like my other businesses have.
Right.
And so, but I can say it was maybe part of the courage decision to leave. So I left and really didn't know what I was going to do. I told my Crowe partners that I wasn't going to take their business. And I didn't know what I was going to do, but because I wanted to leave on good terms. And so I left, and then some things started happening that you really can't explain.
Right.
But looking back, they're foundational to my real estate business, and probably others as well. And I can speak briefly about those.
Yep.
One is I got a call from a tenant. In 1993, there wasn't any construction.
Right.
And but I got a call from a tenant that said, "Where you been?" I said, "Well, I left Crowe." He said, "We want to build a building.
Yep.
And we'd like for you to do it." And I said, "Well, when did I pitch?" He said, "We don't want you to pitch. It's yours. You just come build it." And that was a result of, at Crowe, I always felt like the tenants were my tenants.
Yep.
And I treated them as such. And the tenants that I created these friendships with felt like they were leasing from me, not the Crowe company.
Right.
So when this guy had a need, he called me, and I didn't have to compete for it because he trusted me. And so building trust and taking care of a tenant is one of the stools, the legs on the stool that is a foundation for our company, taking care of the customer. And so I built a 200,000 square foot build-a-suit in 1993 when no one else, the cranes were stacked, you know, and so that was my first client. About about 6 months later, I got a call from Mr. Crowe's daughter, Lucy Billingsley, and she was going through a big refinance on some buildings that she owned. And I had leased her buildings while I was at Crowe, and she had confidence that I knew that market better than the Crowe representatives that were on it.
Right.
So she said, "If you'll lease it, I'll give it to you." So I picked up 2 million square feet of leasing assignments from the Crowe family.
Yep.
Which, you can't explain that.
Right.
And so so the reason, the other leg to the stool, is market knowledge.
Right. That
people will pay you for market knowledge. And the interesting thing about our business is that there are no cheap decisions. There are no small real estate deals.
Right.
So every decision that capital makes is a big decision.
Yep.
And they will overpay you for the right information. I'm astounded at what people get paid in my business who know what they're doing.
Yep.
And we're overpaid. I tell our young group, we're overpaid. My dad would work a year to make what we can make in a 30-day transaction.
Yep.
So market knowledge is everything. And so we, in our company, we are really big on market knowledge. We don't and I lucked into that. Trammel Crowe company said, Holt, you're going to be in the industrial space. You're going to lease buildings north of LBJ between Central and 35. That's it.
Right.
You got to know that market. If it goes a quarter mile past 35, you need to call your buddy in the Las Colinas market.
Right.
So they forced you to learn that market. And because I lucked into that, I learned that concept. And that was my second piece of business was the Billingsley Company. And Lucy's been very good to me. And I actually trained, she had her nephew that wanted to get in the business, and I trained him.
Mm-hmm.
And with the notion, she said, as soon as you get him trained, I'm going to take all that product back.
Yeah.
So I trained him. She took all the product back. And so they've been very good to me. And then the third thing was I got a call from a broker in town who now is a chief investment officer at Hillwood, but at the time was just a broker that we had done business with. And he said, I got a guy in town who's trying to buy buildings, and he's buying them in North Dallas. I told him, North Dallas better than anybody. Will you come down and visit with us? I did that. And that happened to be, this guy said, will you do my due diligence? I said, great. And he asked, what will you charge me? I said, $75 an hour. I thought that was plenty of money. Hindsight, it wasn't. But I did his due diligence. And right after he bought the buildings, he said, well, now we need somebody to lease and manage those. Would you do that? And I said, well, sure.
Yep.
I didn't really know what that was. I'd never been in the service business really prior to that.
Right.
I'd been in the development business at Crowe. So that same company was one of the largest pension advisors in the country, a company called TA Associates. And they bought billions of dollars of real estate in Dallas. And we've done every transaction. We lease and manage every warehouse, every office building. And so that foundational tool was, there's several lessons there. One is market knowledge, but two is treating the brokerage community correctly. I mean, this guy endorsed me.
Right.
And because I'd always treated the brokerage community fairly. So I got that piece of business there. And if you look at those market knowledge, treating tenants with respect and treating brokers with respect, that's the foundation on which our service company is built, and which is now 76 million feet and 2,500 tenants in Texas.
How many people do you have working for you now?
We've got in the service business 175.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Let's take a quick break to highlight this episode's sponsor, Juniper Square. If you aren't familiar with Juniper Square, it's an easy-to-use, all-in-one investment management software designed specifically for real estate owners. We have been using it at Fort Capital for several years now, and it has completely revamped the experience we're able to provide our investors through reporting, management, and efficiency. Here's Brandon Sedloff, Managing Director at Juniper Square, explaining more about their platform.
When we started to look under the hood of these real estate investment managers that were telling us about their problems, one of the things that we identified was that kind of the operating system of record for managing a lot of the most important information was still spreadsheets. They have never been designed to be a system of record, right? And when we started looking at kind of why real estate reporting was the way that it was, what we found is that spreadsheets were being used as a system of record. And the problem that created was it makes it really hard to take this information, get the information out of spreadsheets, and get it into the hands of the people who need it the most, which are your investors.
You can check out episode 37 to listen to my full conversation with Brandon, or visit cjunipersquare.com for more information. That's junipersquare.com. And now back to the show.
How much of those are three fascinating stories. If you had to say a percentage, how much of business success is luck and how much of it is being smart or hard work or things that you can control?
Well, there's a lot of statements about how luck intersects with hard work, and
the harder you work, the luckier you get.
Exactly. But what we want to do at HLC and at Frontier, our investment company, is be in the game.
Yep.
We don't market time. I just sold one of my businesses up until this time. I've in several business lines, and I've never sold a business because I've always chosen businesses that I enjoy and want to be in.
Right.
And we don't market time. So if you're in the game,
right,
you're going to be hitting singles, doubles, good and bad markets. And then every now and then you're going to get lucky like the rest of your peers and something incredible is going to happen.
Right.
But when that goes away and the dust settles, we're in the game.
We're in the game.
We're just sticking with what we do.
Yep.
And so we have several mantras in our business, and our service company is called 1018. We grow 10%. We have an 18% net margin. That's it.
Right.
We stick with it. And if we grow more than that, great. But we will grow 10%. We will have an 18% net margin. And we have other mantras in these businesses that in the bank, same thing. We started a bank 11 years ago, and we have these disciplines, and I don't intend to sell the bank. I intend to keep the bank, and we hire to that so we get the best talent, because these young people don't want to go to a bank and then it sells to somebody else and they work for a big money center bank. So it's being in the game. And
yep.
If you're in the game and you're good at what you do, you're going to get lucky some years, and then you're back in the game.
Right. Is 1018 an annual target?
Every year we will not, if somebody submits a budget that's less than 10% growth,
yep,
we kick it back.
Yep.
And if somebody submits a budget that's less than an 18% net margin, we kick it back. Now, we do have years where...
Did somebody tell you about those numbers?
No, that's another struggle with me and an entrepreneur and never have worked for anybody. Everything I'm learning, Chris, is trial and error.
Right.
So, I was pushing our margins too high. There was a period of time where I was really pushing margins hard and pushing our people too hard. I wasn't being fair with our people. Looking back, I can see that. But they would challenge, well, why you want to make this kind of money and these kind of margins? And so I spent about a year looking at the public markets, looking at other companies to figure out what is a good growth rate. And I've got friends in private equity, and I'd say, if you were looking at me to buy, if I had this growth rate, would you buy me? If I had this growth rate, would you buy me? What would the multiple difference be? And through that aggregation of information, I came up with what I thought was fair for me at the time I was only shareholder, but me and my wife.
Yeah.
And then our employees and their quality of life. And if I did take on new shareholders, would be fair to them. And so I felt like 10% growth at a minimum is what you should be growing if you're vibrant. And I felt like we could maintain an 18% margin, which was higher than my peer group, but lower than I was wanting.
Right.
And so it's worked out, and we can, for the last 7 or 8 years, we've managed that pretty saving, except for investments. And we speak of investments and maybe in a new division or a new city. We know we can't get 1018
right
hiring people. So we'll set that aside in the budget and say, okay, you've got this period of time to get to 1018. If you don't get there, well, then we've made a bad investment.
Right. Are you willing to grow more than 10, obviously more than 10%? Like, what if a year comes along where it's 40 or 50% growth?
Absolutely. No, we do it.
Okay.
So those are minimums.
Yep. Okay. Those are minimums. How long after you got started until you really started hiring people?
Well, pretty quick. And that came about from this institution who I'd never done a budget, but after they bought about 3 buildings, they bought 3 buildings mid-year, and then it came September and they sent me a budget, which I'd never seen. And I called my former controller at Crowe and said, I just received something. I don't have any idea what it is. Can you help? She came back by the office after work and said, well, that's a budget. I said, well, would you do it for me? So my first budgets were done by Crowe employees in the evening.
Yeah.
And so I quickly could see that I either needed to get in this business or get out of it. And so
get in the game.
Yeah, I started hiring people, and I did a very poor job of it. I didn't know how to hire anybody. I was 27. Made a lot of mistakes. And
looking back and knowing that you weren't good at it at the time, what were you doing that wasn't good that maybe somebody listening to might fall into that trap? Because I have the same. We all do. I think it's impossible.
It's
interviewing and hiring is a skill. It's not a right.
No, you're right. That's a good word. Well, I think I would have. One thing I never had, Chris, was a board or really a group of advisors. And I could have. My first board was when I founded the bank, and I have one because the government tells you have to. And I've seen the value in a board now. I really trust and respect our board. It's made up of my mentors. And so not only is it fun to be with them, but I'm just learning a tremendous amount from them. And I would say if I could do it over again, I'd have a board at HLC when I started. And they could have probably helped me because we see some, we're making better decisions at the bank level because we've got people. One of my board members was on the board of Blue Cross Blue Shield. So he was head of the comp committee. Well, I get to get the benefit of that, which I didn't have at the time. So I was making all kinds of mistakes, and we were growing so fast that the nature of the business that I was in is that we didn't pitch business for 5 years. So we didn't need to. I didn't have a collateral piece for 5 years. It all came to us.
Right.
And then I could see that I wasn't being a steward of the business because we had 2 or 3 clients and I was hiring all these people. And if one of them got cross with us, well, then I'd have to let people go. So we made a thoughtful push into business development, created a collateral piece, got on the road, and our business tripled in about 12 months.
Wow.
And we ended up with about 10 clients, and which really felt good. What felt better about it than the revenue was the security of our team and that no one client could hurt us. And,
right.
And that gets better. We now have 46 clients. And so there's no one client that they're all extremely important, but not one of them, could break us. And so hiring is the most difficult thing, and we still struggle with it. We're better at it. Lots of eyes on a candidate is something that we do now that we didn't do before. So, and there's a book called Who that you can go through that gives you a pretty good format and filter.
Right.
It's helpful in hiring people. But boy, I made a lot of mistakes early on.
Oh my gosh. Business is people and people are business.
Now, having said that, I've got several people that have been with me since the beginning.
Really?
26 years. And they're just the core of our company. And we've got a whole over 30 that have been with us over 10 years. So we're getting a really good core built up.
Right. How does that make you feel as somebody that has had people that have been there 26 years, a new class of 10 years plus? I mean, the more people ask me what excites me about Fort, it's really what excites me is the opportunities for the people here.
Yeah. It's a tremendous honor to work with these people. And I've grown to realize that, everybody that I get to work with has been put in my life for a reason.
Right.
And whether we get to be with them for a month or 26 years, it's an honor to share life together because we see each other more than we get to see our families. And so I used to view it differently, but today I'm just so grateful. Everybody, whether I get to be with them a short period of time or a long period of time, is instrumental, and I feel a God ordained appointment for them to come through our system.
You could have the most talented resume on the planet, but somebody that has been in your organization and knows where the good, the bad, the everything, you just cannot trade that.
No.
There's no amount of Harvard MBA and anybody that could replace somebody that's been with you 26 years.
That's right. No, and we even, when I finally did see the importance of shareholders, we gave a large allocation called loyalty shares.
Mm-hmm.
So we sold shares to employees based upon their ability to grow our business, but a large portion of it was based upon their loyalty to the business.
Wow.
And so we gave loyalty discounts to people because.
How did you measure that? Or was it?
Well, it was tenure.
Okay.
So a guy had been there 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years, got a bigger discount.
Yep.
And got more stock offered, more loyalty shares than someone that may be extremely crucial to your business growth that have only been there 2 years. So maybe your top producer was scratching his head saying, wait a minute, why did they get that stock? Well, they got this. I'm big on loyalty.
Yep.
And because it's hard to find.
It's hard. And to that point, do you have any opinion or comment on just kind of this the new generation of folks coming into the business world? It's common now for younger folks to have 3 or 4 jobs by the time they're 30. And that's not anymore looked at as a knock maybe than it was 2 decades ago. If you moved once in the first 10 years, that was weird.
Yes.
How do you think the workforce, or maybe just speak specifically to yourself, what are you doing to attract kind of that younger generation that is seeing all their peers bounce around?
Well, first of all, I don't think we can blame this generation because they're being taught that in school.
Right.
And one, they're being taught that, and 2, the way corporate America has behaved to their parents has reinforced it. So used to that a company would be loyal to an employee. And then we got in the 80s and 90s with
private equity
that would chew you up and spit you out. And so some of it is scar tissue that they may have seen their parents have. And then a large portion of it is they're being taught that in school that, hey, you can have multiple careers and be fulfilled. But that in some businesses, mine included, that flies in the face of where I started with one of our legs, like market knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how can you become an expert
if you're gone in a year?
You're gone in 5 years, or you change industries.
Right.
And you can't in ours. And so, and I would make the case that concept translates to all businesses. You know, when I have a cold or some minor illness, it's okay to go to care now.
Yep.
But I pay a guy $100 an hour to fix me.
Right.
If I have a brain tumor,
right,
care now is not an option.
Right.
And I don't go and ask for a discount. You know, you pay for expertise, and the only way you become an expert is if you stick with something and you work at it. And so you have this. So whether you believe it or not, there's a business case to be made for getting with an industry. One, you got to spend some time and pick the right industry. Don't pick something that's going to go out. But
right.
Real estate, energy, banking are all industries that are going to be around. And pick a geography because the second most important thing, other than your market knowledge, is influence.
Right.
And you're probably seeing some wind at your back now that you've been in your business for a while, that every transaction gets easier because you did a good job with capital or with investors. And so it takes a while to build influence.
Yep.
If you're mobile enough to say, well, I'll start in Austin, then I'll move to Houston, then I'll move to Atlanta, you're missing out on the leverage of influence in a community and with your vendors and customers and investors. And so there's something to be said for sticking with something and not being in a hurry. The proverb says, wealth hastily gotten will dwindle. It's a long path, and you just got to stick with it.
I can remember when I first got started and just seeing, folks that had been in it for a long time, even though maybe I felt like I was more talented but I wasn't getting the deal and they were always getting it and I could just never understand. And now 15 years later, even with the young guys here, they're just telling them like, it's going to take a long time. Anything in life worth having, you have to be patient for and work hard at. But every year that goes by, to your point, that influence compounds year after year.
Yes.
And even though in the early years it's 1 to 2 to 4 to 8, and it seems small, it's gonna exponentially grow. And I told the team the other day here, my goal in year 1 was to buy 1 single family house. My goal this year is to get rid of 50. I could have never imagined that we would buy a single family home our first year. And now, every year we don't have the 10-18 rule, and we do set goals here, but my main goal has always been, let's just get a little bigger this year.
Yeah.
And it just kind of keeps stacking up and adding up. Yeah. But it's patience.
It is.
What within real estate, has there been anything that's changed dramatically since you started in 86 to where we are today, or is the fundamentals still the fundamentals?
Well, there's certainly been sector change, and the way the consumer buys now has changed our industry. So, and we're fortunate. One of the sectors we're in, industrial, is a net beneficiary of that. And so buying online and the way that product gets to a customer is a big winner for industrial. And that's likely the largest shift I've seen in 25 years. You have office markets come and go, and you have retail get hot or not get hot, but to see a fundamental shift where retail is getting crushed and industrial is getting the benefit of it is a big fundamental shift. So yes, that's a change. I don't know that there's any big changes. I mean, there's some capital changes, the REITs changed us a bit, but the way capital changes, whether it's different sources of capital or different structure of capital, really doesn't change the fundamentals at the local level.
Right.
And so, I can say we're doing the same thing. It's back to just being the game. We're doing the same thing that we've always done. And we're so lucky to be in Dallas-Fort Worth.
Oh, I know.
mean, if we were being interviewed in another city, it'd be completely different. But everything here works because of our pro-growth environment in the state and the can-do environment and job creation. So it's all good in Texas.
Texas is the land of opportunity, as I see it. If we're all at the glue factory, we're at least we're the nicest horse at the glue factory. We were talking earlier a little bit just about, how do we just call it, maybe balance. And one of the things that really, I think the person that introduced us was kind of on this premise, and I've been on this kind of search for more balance in my life. I don't say work-life balance because I don't look at it as two separate things. It's just more, I love what I do here, so it's hard to turn it off. But at the end of the day, if I was, laying on my deathbed, I'd probably be wanting to talk to my family and my friends and God and maybe, and obviously my employees, but the business as itself wouldn't probably be the most important thing in my life. And you've done a really good job of that. Has that been through mentorship, or how have you kind of put your life into perspective?
Being intentional, I think, is the greatest tool for anybody but certainly for somebody that's driven. And because being intentional will curb your ambition in the correct way. And so I always wanted, I had to misguided notion. I've said that earlier. I'll tell you why it's misguided in a minute, but misguided notion to be wealthy. I don't know where it came from. I grew up on a farm, but it was there. And so that was a desire. And I also had a strong desire to have a great marriage and to have kids. And with my marriage and my kids, I had a no regrets policy. So I didn't want to look up in 18 years or after they graduate or up until graduation and say, if I'd only done X. And I chose 18 years because that's the period of time you have with them.
Right.
And so I said, whatever it takes, I'm going to have no regrets with my children. It's not to say that something can't go wrong. It's just, if it did, I'd say I did all I could do.
Right.
And same with my marriage. So I was intentional about starting a business, about keeping my marriage together, and about having well-adjusted kids, a godly heritage. And everything else got left behind. So friendships, I have a lot of acquaintances, but I'm just now making friends.
Wow.
And because I didn't make the time for friends. If friends meant golf, I didn't have time for golf. If friends meant travel, I didn't have time for travel. And so I got what I wanted, and that's what being intentional is about. But I'm thankful that I identified what I wanted, because
how did you know you wanted that? Was that just
it probably
you?
Came from my family
Yep.
and my parents, and you know, I'm a Christian, a man of faith, and so I kind of knew what Scripture says about what's important. And you touched on something earlier, mentors. I still have a tremendous amount of mentors, and they started in college. And these are business giants.
Yep.
Many of them are still on my board. Many of them I still meet with. And I chose my mentors. I think this is important. I looked into this, but choose your mentors by what they're good at.
Right.
Some people will choose a mentor that's great at business, but his family's wrecked. Well, don't ask for family advice from a mentor whose family is wrecked.
Right.
So I had family mentors. I had business mentors, and those have served me well. So it was the things that I was intentional about likely had to do with the mentors I had, with my upbringing, and then just reflecting on, when this is all over, what do I want to be remembered by?
Right.
So I'm just so blessed to have a great marriage of 35 years. I've got 3 sons that are just remarkable.
And I want to touch on one thing we talked about a second ago that I just think is fascinating. What did you do? What did you give your kids for their 18th birthday?
Well, I gave them I'll start with the story. My father was an intentional man, very simple, but very focused. And his goal was to make sure it was to love God and love others. And he wanted to make sure that his children loved God and loved others. So there were 5 of us, and my father got a Bible and read it cover to cover for me and one for my 4 siblings, with our personality in mind, with our strengths and weaknesses in mind. So, and he gave that to me later in life when I was in my 40s. And then he started doing that for each grandkid. Now there were 16 of them. So he read a Bible cover to cover for each of my boys, with personal notes on every page for their personality and strengths and weaknesses. And then he gave it, then I did the same. So I'd take that same Bible. He had blue ink, I had red ink, and I would read it cover to cover. It takes a year.
Mm-hmm.
And personalize it for my sons. And we gave it, my father and I gave it to my boys when they turned 18. So they've each got, you know, our thoughts on their life, our thoughts on our life, what we think is important, themes that we developed about humility, human nature, telling the truth, just weights and measures, whatever, business advice, personal advice, it's all in that Bible. And that's That's really our heritage. Now, Dad gets the credit. He did that 21 years. Think about that.
Golly.
Pretty incredible.
That's intentional.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, just that's just one of the coolest gifts. I mean, I couldn't think of anything better. I've got something in my wallet. My dad passed away 7 years ago, but my sister made me this thing. She had found a note, something that he had written and putting on my desk that just said, "I'm proud of you and I love you, Dad," and had it memorialized in this little metal. I'll pull it out. This little thing, and I love it more than anything.
Isn't that awesome? I'm telling you, the power of a spoken word from a dad.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we see the power on the negative side. You know, how many, I've been to prisons and had a lot of all these men. If you usually find somebody with a low self-esteem, you can trace it back to a spoken word of a dad.
Yep.
Or the absence of a dad. So it's so powerful. And we've got to be so intentional to use the right words and the right tools
to
speak into our kids.
And it's tough. It gets tougher to do in a world where there's Instagram and Facebook and there's stuff in their face all day long. Well, we're coming down the stretch here. If you had to give your 21-year-old self some advice, what would you tell him? And I want to get back to the misguided thought on wealth.
Yeah. Well, if I had a do-over, I'd love people more.
Yep.
I'd love my employees and the people I got to work with more. For many, many years, I saw my job as an employer as a contract. And I provided a great place to work. And if they provided a great service and benefit to the company, then we were even.
Yep.
And I didn't start viewing my role as an employer, as a ministry, until about 5 years ago. And realized that I could have been using this business in ways, far more important ways than just making money. And that's the easy part for me. I'm so blessed. I've running a business and starting a business comes easy. I enjoy it. And I feel like that's what God created me to do.
Right.
He created others to do other things. But I would separate my mission from my business. And, you work 5 days a week, you go to church, you think missional. And I've come to realize that my business is my mission, and that in God's economy, that's the only thing that makes sense. Why, if it wasn't that way, then I'd be off mission 5 days a week.
Yeah.
And so if Fort Capital, if HLC and the bank and the logistics company are my mission, then every day I get to be on mission.
Yeah.
Which means I've got to do some things differently, which starts with loving your people, getting to know your people, knowing the point where you can minister to them, where you can serve them, and not keep them arm's length. So I missed out on a lot of hundreds, maybe thousands of opportunities to do that until I figured that out. So that would be a do-over.
Yeah.
But I'm 55. I've got lots of time.
I know you do.
So we are pouring the coal on that concept now at our companies.
And you're not somebody that I see ever really hanging it up. You might go into the office a little less, but that
I enjoy what I do. And now I enjoy business, but now I enjoy it even more because we've got this mission-minded initiative, which includes 2 full-time employees that all they do is figure out how to serve our people. And we're seeing marvelous results from it, both personal results and business results. People who are cared for want to stay. Mm-hmm. They're loyal. And so selfishly, it's working in ways that I wouldn't have anticipated. But I would, if I had a do-over, that would be it. And then I'll get back to this misguided notion. I always thought, and I had very ambitious financial goals, and and I met them. But every time I'd meet them, I'd set a new mark. And what I realized is that money doesn't make us happy. Money just gives us options.
Buys time.
Well, it gives us options. It gives me options that maybe somebody doesn't have. And I could take somebody that's worth $1 billion and I can do everything they want to do. They may just have more options. They may fly somewhere in a G5 and
they got crocodile seats in their G5.
But that's it. And money does not make us happy. And so, and that proved true fairly quickly because I could even see with my kids that we had the option to go places at spring break and we went and then there were others here in town that don't have the options to do that. And they were just as happy as my kids were whining about how cold it was in the lift line.
Yeah.
And so, I've come to realize that, if I think about money any other way than that, it'll mess you up.
It's fascinating you say that and making an analogy to real estate. And I've told my partner this often, and it's something that I became really aware of really early on was, you get on site, we're building this building right behind us. And you have the developer there who's maybe the guy that makes the money and the architect who's paid well and the engineers and you have your contractors and then you have your subcontractors and the guys that are willing to get on the roof when it's 110 degrees and work for 9 hours a day. And every day we'd be on site and at about noon, you'd look at the tree to the right and there was 10 guys underneath that tree having the time of their life. And then there was the other group of us that were in the building. Oh, this sucks. This window's out of place. It's not high enough. And there's really was something to be said when the pattern, no matter what job site you're on or anything. And I'm not saying that the people that I'm with weren't happy too, but when the people that are always laughing the hardest are the ones that maybe when I was a lot younger, I would have said, I don't want to work on a roof in 110 degree heat, but I do want to be happy.
Yeah.
And the ones that are consistently the happiest are the ones on the roof that are underneath the tree having a blast. What was that telling me? And I don't even know the full answer, but I think it's headed to where you are is the values that we place in life or the prestige or the title. They're not making anybody any happier.
No. Happiness is about contentment, not about money. And if you're content in whatever situation you're in, then and gratitude is a big support of being happy. If you're grateful, then you're content. And so being content is in whatever situation you're in is the key to being happy. And money just gives you options.
Yep.
And if I could encourage anything is be intentional.
Yep.
Is that if you're intentional, you're going to see exceptional results. And the last thing you want is to climb the ladder and realize you're on the wrong building.
Yep.
Just be intentional and stop what you're doing and be intentional with purpose. That's what I tell young men and women is that you're going to get what you want.
Right.
So, be intentional about your personal life and your dreams there. Be intentional about your professional life and your dreams there. And be intentional about your spiritual life. Because if you are intentional, you get what you want. And you just, when you do it in balance, it's a really sweet outcome.
Hey everyone, it's Chris here again. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed the show, please follow the show on Apple, Spotify, or subscribe on YouTube. Thanks again, and I'll see you on the next episode.
Chris Powers is the founder and chairman of Fort Capital LP. All opinions from Chris and guests of the Fort podcast are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Fort Capital LP. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for real estate or investment decisions. The Fort with Chris Powers is produced by Straight Up Podcasts.